Well, hello, anatomy students. Mrs. Shelton here. I am going to start with the first of three lectures today on Chapter 10, Your Special Senses. This is the distance learning work that you will be performing through the 2 weeks of April 15th through April 26th. This is carrying on after our last chapter. Chapter 9 was the nervous system. And so now with special senses, we get to have a little fun with just different senses. Now with this, you are going to find that because we're distance learning, things are similar yet different. You're going to find on Schoology that there's actually only two assignments that are posted. One is the reading guide like normal, and then the second one is an activities page. And so that's going to be like the reading guide where it's continuous, but you're going to have different activities that you can do online or from home in order to respond to. And then at the end of chapter 10, you're going to finish up with just an open note, open resource test. So for chapter 10, there's really just three things that I expect you guys to submit back to me, and that is your responses to the reading guide, your responses then to the activities page, and then also take that test. And so that's Sunday, April 26th is the end of this particular unit. And then after that, we will start our next unit, and that'll be another 2-week unit that we will continue on with there. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is actually our the first 6 sections of chapter 10. And so understanding in this particular section, what we're trying to make sure that you do understand in chapter 10 at the beginning is you understand this difference in somatic versus special senses. And so when we talk about somatic versus special senses, you've heard this word somatic before, versus special senses. Your somatic senses are those senses that are everywhere. What I always say is if it's in your finger and if your finger can sense it, it's a somatic sense. So this would be touch, pressure, temperature, pain. These receptors are found in your skin, in deeper tissue. And then when we talk about our special senses are going to be those that require a special organ. Your finger can't do it. So therefore, it has to be a special sense. So your eyes for seeing, your ears for hearing, your taste buds for tasting, your sense of equilibrium for balance. These are all things that would be now classified as your special senses. So what we're going to talk about today is we are going to talk about just some general terms that talks about receptors and sensation in general, and then we'll talk about the special senses of your smell and your taste is what we're going to be addressing. Now, this is just a diagram here just to get you familiar with some of these different nerve endings. And you can see nerve endings have different shapes to them. Remember that form always fits function. You do not need to know these different nerve endings when it comes to our class, Anatomy and Physiology. What you do need to make sure that you understand are these terms of these types of receptors, because every type of neuron that receives information, they respond to different triggers. And so different stimuli is actually going to now trigger that particular nerve to send a signal up to the brain. So when we talk about these receptors, chemoreceptors are going to be receptors that respond to different chemicals. So in your finger, you do not have chemoreceptors in your finger. So chemoreceptors are not part of a somatic sense, but they are part of your special senses of your sense of smell and your sense of taste. So that's chemoreceptors, is different chemicals that you have receptors that respond to. Now, pain receptors respond to tissue damage. So when a cell breaks or cell dies, it's your pain receptors that get triggered and send that signal. We'll talk a little bit more about pain receptors today. Thermoreceptors, we will also talk a little bit more about today, but they respond to temperature. Technically, what they respond to is heat gain or heat loss. But pain receptors, thermoreceptors, these would be somatic senses and associated with them with your somatic senses. Mechanoreceptors actually involve pressure and also movement. Mechanoreceptors are actually involved, so they respond again to this change in movement that occurs. These mechanoreceptors are also part of your equilibrium and also part of your sense of hearing as well. So not only are they somatic senses, but they also are part of your special senses too. And then photoreceptors, your photoreceptors actually respond just to light. Photoreceptors are found only in the retina of the eye. This again, so your photoreceptors are part of your special sense of sight. Now, here's kind of the cool part, and you're going to have some activities in order to do this, but we need to make sure that we can identify some of these terms. So the first term that I need you guys to make sure that you understand is this term of sensation. So when you actually feel something, so when you touch something, when you smell something, it's your brain that's interpreting that signal. And it's your brain that is telling you that that's the signal that I felt, that this is a touch, that there is something that's pain or a certain smell. So it's really kind of cool that your ears really don't hear, your hands really don't feel. It's actually your brain that makes it seem like it does. So it's all your brain that's interpreting what all of these signals are in the brain. Now, it's also your brain. So when you actually feel something, the fact that I am touching my finger or I'm touching my arm, now I'm seeing it too. So that's another way for my brain to figure out where that signal is coming from. But your brain has to make its best guess as to where that signal came from. Because that stimuli started in one location and it's going up to your brain has to make sure and kind of think, oh, where did it come from? Oh, it must have been the left wrist, is where it came from. So that's a projection, is when your brain is now actually predicting where did that signal actually originate and making you feel like it came from there. But again, it's your brain that's actually doing that feeling, but that it's projecting where it came from for you. So kind of cool. We'll actually have you guys read a little bit too about synesthesia. With synesthesia, sometimes the brain interprets different sensations differently. This is why some people can smell sounds. Think about that. Now, sensory adaptation. This particular term here, we really see this with our sense of smell. The sensory adaptation is when your brain, you have these sensory signals that are coming all the time into your brain. But what ends up happening is your brain will start ignoring the unimportant stimuli. We talked about in class how, sometimes your brain now tunes you into a stimuli all of a sudden, like if you're parked at a stoplight and all of a sudden your brain is saying, hey, there's somebody staring at you from the side. But this is also where smells, sensory adaptation of smells, usually about 1 to 2 minutes, your brain kind of just tunes out that smell in order to be ready to pick up new odors and new smells, is what ends up happening. But sensory adaptation, this is why, I mean, you don't feel your pants on you. You don't feel your clothes on you because you did when you put them on, but then your brain's like, I don't need to pay attention to that anymore. So that would be a sensory adaptation in order to now free the brain to take in new senses and help you pay attention to those new senses that are coming in. Now, this particular section here on the 3 kinds of receptors, ignore it. Skip past that and you don't need to worry about it. So what we need to make sure that we're also addressing here is we need to make sure that we understand a little bit about your temperature sense. There's going to be an activity for you guys to do on the activities page, just to kind of just see where you've experienced this sense of temperature. We have warm receptors and we have cold receptors. However, what I need you to know, this is the big part here, is that receptors, what they're doing is there's no such thing as cold. In science, there's no cold. It's heat gain or heat loss. And that's what our thermoreceptors are detecting, is heat gain and heat loss from the body. So you do have receptors that are more in tune to heat gain, and you have those that are in tune to that heat loss. But that's when we feel cold or we feel hot. We are feeling either heat gain or heat loss is what we're actually doing. Now, we also know that if we have too high of heat or too much cold, what we end up doing is we are damaging ourselves, and that triggers pain receptors. Now, when we talk about your sense of pain, so your sense of pain, this is responding to tissue damage. So with this, if we have cell damage, well, we know there's a difference between pressure and pain. So if you were pinching yourself and you pinched and you now increase the pressure and increase the pressure and increase the pressure, well, ultimately it's going to turn to pain, because now at that point we are starting to feel the fact that we are squishing cells, we're damaging tissues. And so now that sends different signals is what's going to occur. But here is actually, so with pain receptors too, we need to make sure that we are understanding with pain receptors. We talked last chapter in chapter 9, nervous system, we talked about some neurotransmitters that actually block pain. So that's what endorphins would do, is endorphins would actually come through that sensory pathway, and somewhere at the synapse would block the brain from receiving that pain signal. Now, when we talk about acute pain, anytime in anatomy we say it's acute, that means it's instantaneous, but there are also people that then have chronic pain and they suffer from chronic pain, and that's constant signals to the brain that they are in pain in that particular area. Now, a concept I also need you guys to understand, because this really helps you understand projection and sensation, is this concept of referred pain. When your brain is trying to feel this visceral pain, your viscera, the organs of your body, do have pain receptors. They don't have other types of receptors, but they do have pain receptors. Think about why. We don't necessarily want our organs to, be feeling everything other than there's damage, and now we need to alert our body that to happen. Now, referred pain, though, is when the brain is receiving a signal from an organ that it's not used to receiving a signal from, but it projects it to a part of the body that now is not correct. Is this referred pain? Now, when we address this referred pain, here as a diagram just for you guys to take a look at. It's kind of fun to actually kind of see. Like if you went to the doctor and you were going, oh gosh, neck pain up here, and your doctor said, oh, I think, we need to really examine your lungs and your diaphragm. You'd be thinking, okay, this doctor is pretty wacky. But this is actually a very common location for referred pain to happen when something is actually down in the lungs. The brain is getting it wrong of where that signal is coming from. Very common one that you are familiar with is with heart attacks. Oftentimes, somebody who is suffering a heart attack is actually having pain radiating down their left arm. Well, there's nothing wrong with the left arm. It's actually all coming from the heart, but the brain is getting it wrong, and it is actually projecting that it's left arm pain instead of it recognizing that it's actually the heart that is in pain. How this works is the fact that where that referred pain is now being projected to, and that viscera or that organ that is now actually experiencing the pain, they actually share a common sensory pathway to the brain. So when the brain gets it, well, the brain has to figure out, did that come from the heart or did it come from the left arm? Well, where is it received signals all of your entire life? Left arm, left arm, left arm, left arm. And so the brain usually goes with kind of an Occam's razor type of situation. Oh, it must be left arm pain again. Must be what's happening, instead of recognizing that it's actually coming from the heart. So that's how referred pain occurs. And oftentimes, back to this diagram, why the brain often gets it wrong when we do have this visceral pain, when our organs are actually being damaged, and trying to alert your body to the fact that we've got some organ damage and we need some help. So at this point, this would actually be a good place to stop and actually go to your activities page. We just covered some of the main content from 10.1 through section 3. So you can go to the activities page at this point and do some of those activities, and then be a good time to then come back to this video and then watch about olfaction and gustation, your sense of smell and your sense of taste. So on this particular diagram, so here is just a section on olfaction. You have this diagram on your reading guide for you to label. And the parts that I need you guys to know is from this particular diagram, we need to know where we're talking about when we talk about our sense of smell or olfaction. So this is your nasal cavity, but up here, about a postage size piece of tissue up here, this is actually your brain. Let's actually go to a better diagram. So this is blown up here. So here's my nasal cavity. Here's actually your palate of your mouth. So that's your upper palate. But right up in here, so this is the base of your brain. So here underneath your brain, there is this bulb here that is called your olfactory bulb. And your olfactory bulb has these little nerve endings. And so here's my olfactory bulb. And here are these nerve endings, these receptor cells that extend down into your nasal cavity. And so now down in your nasal cavity, as you inhale any types of chemicals that your brain can detect, well, those chemicals, and different chemicals have different shapes, those will actually trigger these receptor cells to now respond and send a signal to the brain. So here's my olfactory bulb, and then I've got my olfactory tract that now sends a signal to the brain for the brain to interpret what was that smell. So make sure you know nasal cavity, make sure you know olfactory bulb, and then you also know what these receptor cells are down here that are going to be responding to different chemicals that do come through your nasal cavity. Now with this, your sense of smell is actually pretty detailed. I mean, there's a lot of different chemicals that your sense of smell can detect. The analogy that I give you on the reading guide is this is actually very similar to how a piano can give you so many different sounds, because when we take a look at these receptor cells, maybe I trigger this receptor cell and I trigger this one with the different chemical that came in. Well, that sends a different signal than if I just triggered one of these receptor cells by itself. Or now if I trigger 6 of them all at one time with that particular chemical, well, that's going to be interpreted as a completely different smell. So when you're sick, how's your sense of smell? Now, also when you're sick, how's your sense of taste? Because really, what's more important in your sense of taste is actually your sense of smell. Because when we do talk about taste or gustation, your sense of taste is also chemoreceptors that are involved in taste. We actually don't taste very many chemicals, and your tongue is not responsible for tasting very many. Now, what we need to know when we do talk about our sense of taste, so here's a diagram that you guys also have that you will need to understand. On your tongue, what you end up having on your tongue and your tongue surface are these structures that are called papillae. Now, those are not your taste buds. Those are your papillae. Your taste buds are actually down here in these pits of the papillae. So that will be my grunge band name if I ever start one, the pits of papillae. But that's where your taste buds are, kind of like the nodes of Ranvier are a favorite description. The pits of papillae are a favorite description of mine as well, because I'm a science nerd, sorry. But down here in these pits, chemicals have to get down here for us to have a taste. Now, our taste buds, and here's a blown up picture of your taste buds, there is a taste cell, and then there's these little taste hairs that are down here. So this is actually the taste bud down here with this taste cell and these taste hairs. Chemicals have to land on these taste hairs in order to now trigger a stimuli, trigger that action potential to now send a signal through these sensory nerve fibers. Now, with your sense of taste. So here you guys have probably seen pictures like this that show your tongue has these different areas and regions where it detects. That's bogus. It's been debunked. If you have a textbook that shows a taste map, throw it out. It's old. It does not. It actually is showing bad science that got carried on and on and on. Even though it was more of just an implied, oh, yes, over on the side, yeah, you're going to taste sour more. Well, now your brain starts thinking, oh, well, maybe I can taste sour more on this particular region. And that's not the case. We just have different concentrations of taste buds, and those taste buds can actually detect these 4 main tastants. Sweet. So what sweet is responding to is sugar. So just these little monosaccharides is what is being detected there. Salty, you have those taste hairs responding to ions. So like sodium or chloride ions is detected as salty. Your sour is actually responding to acids. And so when you have acidic solutions like lemon juice, now with that is now being detected as sour. Something that is bitter is basic in solution. So soap, you've probably been washing your hands a lot, and sometimes you don't rinse your fingers off. So that tastes a little bit bitter. Now there's some other tastes that we now recognize that your taste hairs can trigger and detect. So umami is an amino acid. So amino acids are parts of proteins. So this gives you that savory flavor in foods when you are eating something that is meaty. Another particular tastant that we now know that your tongue can detect is metallic. So when you actually have some metals, you get a metallic-y flavor. And there's actually one more, so look it up. So with that, at this point now would be a good break for you to go do some taste and smell activities on your activity sheet. So with that, this should be about 2 different days worth of information for you and 2 different days worth of activities for you guys to do at home while we are distance learning. So with that, always email me any questions that you guys may have. And I am sad that I don't see you for the rest of the school year, but I'm really happy to be providing you guys some fun activities to do at home and continue your learning while you're at home. So anyway, hope you guys are safe. Hope you guys are good. And I hope to check in with you guys soon. So see you guys later.